Have you ever wondered what goes on behind those sparking flames and rhythmic hammering? Ever thought about the people who literally shaped the Middle Ages with their bare hands? Number 10. The Masters of Metal and Fire. Fire roars, metal glows, sweat drips. In the heart of every medieval town stood a blacksmith's forge, the beating heart of technological innovation during times we often mistakenly call dark. These weren't just workers, they were the engineers, artists, and magicians of their time, transforming raw earth into tools that built castles and cathedrals, weapons that decided the fate of kingdoms, and everyday items that made medieval life possible. The typical blacksmith's day began before dawn. While others slept, the smith would be stoking the fires of his forge, preparing for hours of intense physical labor. By the time the town awoke, the distinctive ping, ping, ping of hammer on metal would already be echoing through narrow streets, a constant soundtrack to medieval life. The importance of these craftsmen cannot be overstated. In a world without factories, without mass production, without industrial machinery, the blacksmith was indispensable. Need a nail? See the blacksmith. Horse needs shoeing? Blacksmith. Plow broken during spring planting. Your entire harvest depends on the blacksmith. Defending your town from raiders. You guessed it, those swords and armor came from the smithy. Without blacksmiths, the medieval world simply stops, explains Dr. Alina Hoffman, curator of medieval technologies at the British Museum. No farming tools means no food, no weapons means no defense, no horseshoes means limited transportation. They weren't just making pretty objects, they were making civilization possible. Number 9. From Earth to Sword, the magical transformation. How do you turn dirt into a deadly blade? It sounds like alchemy, and in many ways, medieval people viewed it as equally mysterious. The process begins with iron ore, essentially rocks containing iron compounds mixed with various impurities. These unassuming stones, often reddish-brown from iron oxide, were the starting point for everything from simple nails to elaborate Gothic cathedral ironwork. Medieval mining was brutally difficult work. Miners would follow veins of ore into hillsides, working by the dim light of tallow candles, using picks and shovels to extract the precious material. The ore would then undergo an initial smelting process in a bloomery, a type of furnace that could reach temperatures approaching 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside these bloomeries, something remarkable happened. Carbon from the burning charcoal would combine with the oxygen in the iron oxide, creating carbon dioxide gas and leaving behind a spongy mass of relatively pure iron called a bloom. This bloom would then be hammered while hot, forcing out impurities and consolidating the metal. The resulting iron was serviceable but still contained significant impurities and had inconsistent carbon content. For tools requiring harder edges, blacksmiths learned to selectively add carbon to iron through a process called carburization, essentially heating the iron in contact with carbon-rich materials like charcoal or bone. This created a primitive form of steel, harder than iron but not as brittle as high-carbon steel would be. What's truly remarkable, says archaeological metallurgist Dr. Thaddeus Jenkins, is that medieval smiths accomplished all this without understanding the chemistry involved. They couldn't analyze carbon content or metallurgical structures. They worked from experience, tradition, and careful observation, developing sophisticated techniques through trial and error over generations. Number 8. Toolbox of the medieval metalworker. What tools does it take to make tools? Medieval blacksmiths worked with surprisingly few implements, but each was used with remarkable skill. The forge itself was the centerpiece, a hearth specifically designed to reach and maintain high temperatures, typically constructed of stone or brick with a chimney to draw away smoke. Bellows, large leather contraptions that could be pumped to force air into the fire, were crucial for reaching the temperatures needed to make iron malleable. The anvil was perhaps the most iconic tool of the trade. Far more than just a heavy block of metal, a good anvil had specialized features: a flat face for general hammering, a horn for shaping curves, and often various holes for specialized tasks. Anvils were frequently passed down through generations of smiths, becoming smoother and more polished with decades of use. Medieval anvils were works of art in themselves, explains historical blacksmith Richard Tewksbury, who recreates medieval techniques for historical demonstrations. A well-made anvil rings clearly when struck, what we call a singing anvil, and returns energy to the hammer, making the smith's work more efficient. Bad anvils deaden the blow and exhaust the smith more quickly. Hammers came in dozens of specialized forms. The cross-peen hammer, with its wedge-shaped end opposite the striking face, was used for spreading metal. Ball-peen hammers helped with riveting and shaping curved surfaces. Sledgehammers required an assistant, called a striker, who would swing in coordinated rhythm with the master smith's lighter hammer blows. Tongs allowed smiths to manipulate glowing hot metal without burning themselves, and came in various shapes for different grips. Chisels, punches, drifts for enlarging holes, swages for creating grooves, and fullers for creating channels rounded out the toolkit, along with quenching baths of water or oil for rapidly cooling metal. Most remarkable of all, many blacksmiths made their own tools. The hammer that shaped a sword might itself have been forged by the same hands that wielded it. Number 7. The sword, soul of medieval weaponry. Could a simple piece of metal determine the fate of kingdoms? When that metal was a finely crafted sword in the hands of a skilled knight, absolutely. Swords weren't just weapons in medieval society, they were symbols of power, status, and technological achievement. Creating a sword was one of the most challenging tasks a blacksmith could undertake. Unlike tools like hammers or plows, which could tolerate some imperfections, a sword needed to be simultaneously hard enough to hold an edge, flexible enough not to snap when striking armor, and balanced for effective fighting. Achieving this combination of properties required sophisticated knowledge of heat treatment. The medieval sword represents one of the highest technological achievements of its time, says weapons historian Dr. Tobias Capwell. People tend to think of the Middle Ages as technologically primitive, but creating a good sword required understanding complex metallurgical principles and executing them perfectly. The process began with a bar of iron that would be hammered flat and folded repeatedly, helping to distribute carbon evenly and work out impurities. Folding wasn't done hundreds of times as some myths suggest, typically between 5 to 30 times depending on the quality of the starting material. The resulting blade would then be ground to shape before the critical hardening process. Hardening involved heating the blade to a critical temperature, judged by color rather than thermometers, and then rapidly quenching it in water or oil. This created a very hard but potentially brittle blade. To counter this brittleness, the smith would then temper the blade by reheating it to a lower temperature, which sacrificed some hardness for increased toughness. The most famous swords featured pattern welding, where different types of iron and steel were twisted and forge welded together, creating beautiful patterns in the finished blade. These weren't just decorative, they combined the best properties of different metals, creating a blade stronger than any single type of metal available at the time. Number 6. Armor, the medieval life insurance policy. How much would you pay to make yourself arrow-proof? For medieval knights, the answer was almost any price. A full suit of plate armor represented a massive investment, comparable to buying a luxury sports car today, but it offered something priceless: protection on the battlefield. Contrary to popular belief, well-made armor wasn't the clunky, movement-restricting metal cage often depicted in films. A properly fitted suit of armor distributed weight across the body and articulated at joints in sophisticated ways, explains Jessica Wadsworth, curator of medieval arms and armor at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Knights could run, mount horses unassisted, and even do cartwheels in full armor. Creating such armor required specialized armorers' skills that went beyond general blacksmithing. While village smiths might repair armor or create simple pieces, elaborate suits were typically made by dedicated armorers in urban centers like Milan, Augsburg, or Greenwich. The process began with sheet metal that was hammered into shape using specialized stakes, small anvils, and hammers. Raising the metal, creating curved forms from flat sheets, required thousands of precise hammer blows. Heat treatment was crucial to create metal that was hard enough to deflect weapons but not so brittle it would shatter on impact. The most impressive feature of medieval armor was its articulation. Places like elbows and knees needed plates that could move without exposing vulnerable gaps. Solutions like overlapping lames, strips of armor, connected with leather straps or rivets allowed for remarkable freedom of movement while maintaining protection. Armor evolved dramatically throughout the Middle Ages, from early mail, interlocked metal rings to the full plate harnesses of the 15th century. This evolution was driven by a technological arms race between weapons and armor. As arrowheads and sword designs improved to penetrate defenses, armor adapted to counter these developments. The medieval armorer was essentially an engineer, Wadsworth notes. They were solving complex problems of material strength, weight distribution, ergonomics, and protection, all while creating something that also served as a status symbol for the wearer. Number 5. The Hidden Army, agricultural toolmakers. Who were the unsung heroes behind medieval society's survival? The blacksmiths who forged farming tools rarely received the same attention as those who created gleaming swords and armor, but without them, medieval civilization would have starved to death. The plow was perhaps the most crucial agricultural innovation, allowing farmers to turn heavy soil effectively. Its large iron plowshare had to withstand tremendous forces while cutting through compacted earth and root systems. A broken plow during planting season could spell disaster for a farming community. Agricultural tools had to balance multiple factors, explains agricultural historian Dr. Margaret Chen. They needed to be durable enough to last through a season of hard use, but affordable enough that farmers could replace them when necessary. They needed to be heavy enough to do their job effectively, but not so heavy they exhausted the user or draft animal. Scythes for harvesting grain featured long, carefully curved blades that required deep metallurgical knowledge to create. The blade had to hold a keen edge through days of cutting, while being thin and light enough for the farmer to swing repeatedly. Hammering these blades to the proper thinness without weakening them was a specialized skill. Smaller tools like hoes, sickles, and pruning hooks each had specific design requirements based on their use. Even seemingly simple tools like shovels required careful design considerations. The blade needed to be hard enough to penetrate soil but not so brittle it would crack when hitting a rock. Maintenance was just as important as creation. Blacksmiths spent much of their time repairing and resharpening existing tools. This relationship between farmers and smiths created a feedback loop that gradually improved tool designs based on field experience. What's fascinating about medieval agricultural tools, says Chen, is how many of their basic designs persisted well into the industrial age and beyond. The fundamental form of a scythe or pitchfork remained remarkably stable for centuries because blacksmiths had already optimized them through generations of incremental improvements. Number 4. The guild system, medieval quality control. Would you trust a surgeon who never went to medical school? Medieval people felt the same way about untrained blacksmiths. By the late Middle Ages, most urban smiths belonged to guilds, organizations that regulated training, quality, and business practices within the trade. Becoming a smith typically meant spending 7 to 10 years progressing from apprentice to journeyman to master. Young apprentices, often starting around age 12 to 14, would live in their master's household, learning the basics of the trade while performing menial tasks like pumping the bellows and cleaning the shop. Gradually, they would be entrusted with more complex work under supervision. After completing an apprenticeship, a smith became a journeyman, literally a day worker who could earn wages but not yet run his own shop. Many journeymen traveled between towns, hence the name, working for different masters to broaden their skills. Finally, to become a master with their own shop, a journeyman would need to create a masterpiece demonstrating exceptional skill, which would be judged by established masters. The guild system was as much about controlling competition as ensuring quality, explains economic historian Dr. Robert Unger. By limiting who could practice the trade and under what conditions, guilds protected their members' livelihoods, but they also maintained standards that benefited consumers and preserved specialized knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Guilds established prices, regulated working hours, prohibited members from poaching each other's customers, and enforced quality standards. They also provided social safety nets, caring for members who became ill or injured and supporting widows and orphans of deceased members. Not all blacksmiths belonged to guilds. Rural smiths often operated independently, serving small communities without formal regulation. But in major urban centers, the guild system created a structured framework that fostered technical innovation while maintaining traditional knowledge. Number 3. Sacred flames, the spiritual side of smithing. Can you master fire without touching the divine? Medieval blacksmiths existed at a fascinating intersection of practical craftsmanship and mystical significance. In many cultures, metalworking carried spiritual connotations that set smiths apart from other tradespeople. This spiritual dimension had ancient roots. Norse mythology featured Wayland the Smith, a legendary craftsman of magical items. In Christian contexts, saints like Dunstan and Eligius, who reportedly pinched the devil's nose with his smithing tongs, became patron saints of blacksmiths. Even the tools of the trade carried symbolic weight, the forge representing purification, the hammer divine creative power. Blacksmiths worked with the classical elements earth, ore, fire, air from bellows, and water for quenching, explains historian of medieval religion Dr. Elena Robertson. They transformed raw materials into items of value through processes that seemed magical to the uninitiated. It's no wonder they were often viewed as having one foot in the mundane world and one in the realm of mystery. This spiritual dimension manifested in practical ways. Many smiths would mark their work with crosses or other religious symbols, not just as decorations but as blessings on the objects they created. Guild ceremonies often included religious elements, and smiths might observe particular saints' days with special significance to their craft. The smiths' relationship with fire particularly contributed to their mystical reputation. Fire was both creative and destructive, a power to be respected and controlled. The ability to master this element set smiths apart and sometimes led to suspicion. Records occasionally show blacksmiths accused of witchcraft or dealings with supernatural forces. The blacksmith's spiritual identity was complex, says Robertson. They were simultaneously ordinary tradespeople and figures of wonder, creating everyday objects through processes that seemed to transcend the ordinary. This duality gave them a unique place in medieval society. Number 2. Beyond weapons, the decorative arts. Can a door hinge be a masterpiece? In the hands of a skilled medieval blacksmith, utilitarian objects became canvases for artistic expression. While weapons and armor often received the most attention, some of the most impressive blacksmithing work appeared in architectural fittings, household items, and decorative objects. The wrought iron gates, grills, and hinges adorning medieval cathedrals and castles display technical virtuosity that still impresses today. Creating these elaborate designs required sophisticated techniques like forge welding, joining pieces of hot metal by hammering them together, and riposte, hammering from the reverse side to create raised designs. Medieval decorative ironwork represents one of the highest expressions of the blacksmith's art, says architectural historian Dr. Samuel Whitaker. These weren't just functional objects, they were statements of cultural values, displays of wealth and sophistication, and expressions of religious devotion. Chest and door hinges evolved from simple structural elements into elaborate strap hinges that spread across the surface, providing both strength and decoration. These often featured scrollwork, floral motifs, or zoomorphic designs, with the most elaborate examples found in churches and noble residences. Household items provided another outlet for creativity. Candle holders, fire irons, cooking utensils, and furniture fittings all offered opportunities for embellishment. Even something as simple as a key might feature an ornate bow handle with Gothic architectural motifs or animal figures. The techniques required for this decorative work differed from weapon or tool making. While structural strength remained important, achieving precise, delicate forms required specialized tools like small swages, grooved tools for creating consistent shapes, and punches for creating texture and detail. The blacksmith creating decorative work was operating at the intersection of multiple roles we now separate, Whitaker explains. They were simultaneously engineers ensuring structural integrity, designers creating aesthetic forms, and artists expressing cultural ideas through their medium. Number 1. The blacksmith's legacy, tools that built a world. Would our world exist without the medieval blacksmith? As we've seen throughout this journey through the smoky realm of the forge, these craftsmen shaped more than just metal, they shaped history itself. From the grand cathedrals soaring toward heaven to the humble plow turning soil for crops, blacksmiths provided the tools that made medieval life possible. The technological knowledge they developed forms the foundation of modern metallurgy. Their trial and error discoveries about hardening and tempering metals, about combining different materials for optimal properties, about working with alloys, all these innovations laid groundwork for the Industrial Revolution centuries later. Their organizational structures, the apprenticeship system, quality standards, specialized techniques, established patterns for skilled trades that persisted well into the modern era. The balance they struck between innovation and tradition helped preserve and transmit crucial knowledge across generations. Perhaps most significantly, blacksmiths democratized technology. While kings might commission elaborate swords and armor, the village smith created the nails that built humble homes, the cooking pots that prepared daily meals, the horseshoes that enabled transportation and farming. They made sophisticated metal technology available to ordinary people in ways that transformed everyday life. The medieval blacksmith represents something profound about human creativity and problem-solving, reflects technological historian Dr. James Harrington. With limited scientific understanding but keen observation and inherited wisdom, they developed remarkably sophisticated solutions to the challenges of their time. They remind us that innovation doesn't always require advanced scientific theory. Sometimes it grows from practical experience and the determination to improve the tools at hand. As our world becomes increasingly digital, with fewer people experiencing the direct transformation of raw materials into finished objects, perhaps we can learn something valuable from these masters of metal. Their intimate knowledge of their materials, their problem-solving approach, and their integration of functionality and beauty offer lessons that remain relevant despite the centuries that separate us. The next time you use a tool, any tool, consider the lineage of knowledge and craftsmanship that made it possible. And perhaps spare a thought for the medieval blacksmiths who helped forge not just iron and steel, but the very world we inhabit today. Have you ever realized how much of our present was shaped by these forgotten masters of fire and metal?